Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Really excited to talk to y'all about Pope Leo the 14th's first official homily. I mean, he's given a few already, but today marks the beginning of his ministry. And so this is, kind of when he officially begins his pontificate from the homily that he gave earlier this morning from the Sunday morning liturgy. So we're going to take a look at that and a transcript of it from the Vatican. Also, as well as a message that he gave during the Regina Coeli at the conclusion of the Mass from earlier today, where he makes some interesting comments about Pope Francis that I think you will be curious to hear about. So we're going to take a look at that, see what he says, and discuss some of the implications that it might have on a number of things. So that's what's in store for this show. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and like button if you haven't already. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see and follow along with me as we take a look at the transcript of his homily. Vincent says, I'm a real big fan of you. Keep doing this. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, definitely we'll continue to keep you up to date with what's going on with this pontificate, as well as just numerous other videos on all sorts of subjects. In fact, I'm going to be reviewing one of Wes Huff's videos and interviews that he gave recently where he talks about questions about Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. So, there's a wide range of subjects that I cover on the channel, but I'll continue to cover information like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this together. So this is from today. Holy Mass for the beginning of the pontificate of Pope Leo the 14th, homily of the Holy Father Leo the 14th, St. Peter's Square. He says, Dear brothers, brother cardinals, brothers, bishops, and priests, distinguished authorities and members of the diplomat corps, greetings to the pilgrims who came on the occasion of the Jubilee of confraternities, brothers and sisters. I greet all of you with a heart full of gratitude at the beginning of the ministry that has been entrusted to me. Here's another St. Augustine quote, right? Because he's an Augustinian, right? So go ahead and get used to it. You're going to see a lot of St. Augustine quotes, which is a good thing, right? It's a whole lot of good stuff from Augustine. St. Augustine wrote, Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. That's that famous line, one of several, from the Confessions. I remember reading this as a Protestant when I started looking into the Church Fathers, and I was so taken back by Augustine's Confessions, and especially this part. Especially this. I thought this was absolutely incredible because it really speaks, I think, to the human experience where one's heart is restless until it's satisfied, until it meets God, right? And only in God is that heart satisfied. So he starts out his homily by quoting that. In these days, we have experienced intense emotions. The death of Pope Francis filled our hearts with sadness. In those difficult hours, we felt like the crowds that the gospel says were like sheep without a shepherd. Yet on Easter Sunday, we received his final blessing. And in the light of the resurrection, we experienced the days that followed in the certainty that the Lord never abandons his people, but gathers them when they are scattered and guards them as a shepherd guards his flock. And he continues. In this spirit of faith, the College of Cardinals met for the conclave. Coming from the different backgrounds and experiences, we placed in God's hands our desire to elect the new successor of Peter, the Bishop of Rome. So, of course, for maybe the Protestants or non-Catholics who are watching, the concept of the papacy is that the Pope is the successor of Peter. And the Pope is going to be the Bishop of Rome. So whoever the Bishop of Rome is, that is the successor of Peter. Because the claim is Jesus built the church on Peter the rock in Matthew 16:18-19, and created an institution that endures in successors. And Peter discharged his authority in Rome. So the leader of the Roman community then becomes the leader in the line of Peter. He says, the Bishop of Rome, a shepherd capable of preserving the rich heritage of the Christian faith and at the same time looking to the future in order to confront the questions, concerns, and challenges of today's world. So it's a balancing act. We see this very often from the magisterium. On the one hand, it is attempting to preserve that which has been handed down from the apostles, wants to preserve that whole and intact, but it also wants to address new challenges and new questions that are especially emerging in the modern world, and then apply that deposit of faith, apply that faith that has been given by the apostles to modern circumstances. So it's a balancing act. And sometimes some people have a tendency to go too far one way or the other. But he's saying really there needs to be both. Preserving the rich heritage of the Christian faith, but also confronting the questions, concerns, and challenges of today's world. And I suspect that's going to be indicative of his pontificate as a whole. I suspect that you're going to see an attempt to have that balancing act. Accompanied by your prayers, we could feel the working of the Holy Spirit, who is able to bring us into harmony, like musical instruments, so that our heartstrings could vibrate in a single melody. I was chosen without any merit of my own, and now with fear and trembling I come to you as a brother, who desires to be the servant of your faith and your joy, walking with you on the path of God's love, for he wants us all to be united in one family. Love and unity. These are the two dimensions of the mission entrusted to Peter by Jesus. We see this in today's gospel, which takes us to the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus began the mission he received from the Father, to be a fisher of humanity in order to draw it up from the waters of evil and death. And this is providential and timely because this is also the very liturgy where the Pope receives the ring of the fisherman. That is, he receives the ring that represents the papacy and represents that it comes from Peter the fisherman. And it was interesting watching video footage of that. He's visibly moved, almost in tears, at that moment when Cardinal Tagle gives him the ring of the fisherman. I posted a short of that earlier. You can go and check that out. Walking along the shore, he had called Peter and the other first disciples to be like him, fishers of men. Now, after the resurrection, it's up to them to carry on the mission, to cast their nets again and again, to bring the hope of the gospel into the waters of the world, to sail the seas of life so that all may experience God's embrace. How could Peter carry out this task? The gospel tells us that it is possible only because his own life was touched by the infinite and unconditional love of God, even in the hour of his failure and denial. For this reason, when Jesus addresses Peter, the gospel uses the Greek verb agapao, which refers to the love that God has for us, to the offering of himself without reserve and without calculation. Whereas the verb used in Peter's response describes the love of a friendship that we have for one another. Consequently, when Jesus asks Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He's referring to the love of the Father. It is as if Jesus said to him, only if you have known and experienced this love of God, which never fails, will you be able to feed my lambs. Only in the love of God the Father will you be able to love your brothers and sisters with that same more, that is, by offering your life for your brothers and sisters. So he says Peter is entrusted with the task of loving more and giving his life for the flock. The ministry of Peter is distinguished precisely by this self-sacrificing love, because the Church of Rome presides in charity. You remember where that's a quote from? If you know your church fathers, you should recognize that. Because the Church of Rome presides in love. That's Ignatius of Antioch. And its true authority is the charity of Christ. It's never a question of capturing others by force, by religious propaganda, or by means of power. So this is what Pope Francis often talked about, where he spoke negatively of proselytizing, which he meant this, trying to force people or using religious propaganda. Instead, it's always and only a question of loving as Jesus did. The Apostle Peter himself tells us that Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, and has become the cornerstone. Moreover, if the rock is Christ, Peter must shepherd the flock without ever yielding to the temptation to be an autocrat, lording it over those entrusted to him. On the contrary, he is called to serve the faith of his brothers and sisters. That's why you have Gregory the Great, famously. What title does he use for the papacy? Is it Lord of the Worlds? No. The servant of servants, or the servant of the servants of God. That's where it comes from the gospel. On the contrary, he's called to serve the faith of his brothers and sisters and to walk alongside them, for all of us are living stones, called through our baptism to build God's house in fraternal communion, in the harmony of the Spirit, the coexistence of diversity. In the words of St. Augustine, the church consists of all those who are in harmony with their brothers and sisters who love their neighbor. Brothers and sisters, I would like that our first great desire be for a united church, a sign of unity and communion, which becomes a leaven for a reconciled world. Now, some people are wondering, what's he talking about here, a united church? Is he talking about all the factions within Catholicism? Maybe. But I suspect he's talking more broadly here. I think he's actually talking beyond that. He's got a whole lot of representatives from other communities there. And I think he's basically saying that he wants to see unity with all Christians, the Eastern Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox, the Anglicans, all the Protestants, all those who are present there at this first Mass of his, or the beginning of his ministry. In this our time, we still see too much discord, too many wounds caused by hatred, violence, prejudice, the fear of difference, and an economic paradigm that exploits the earth resources and marginalizes the poorest. For our part, we want to be a small leaven of unity, communion, and fraternity within the world. We want to say to the world with humility and joy, look to Christ, come closer to him, welcome his word that enlightens and consoles, listen to his offer of love, and become his one family. In the one Christ, we are together one. This is the path to follow together among ourselves, but also with our sister Christian churches, you see? So I think that he's speaking broadly here, not just unity within Catholicism, yes, that, but also broadly speaking with all Christian communities. And even with those who follow other religious paths, he wants to see unity with them as well. And I've highlighted this from a number of audiences of his already, and I've spoken about that at great length, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But do note that he wants to see unity here, even with non-Christians. And with those who are searching for God, that's going to be your atheists, or agnostics, I should say. With all women and men of goodwill, in order to build a new world where peace reigns. So he wants to see, even with non-Christians, unity with everyone of goodwill to bring about peace for society. This is the missionary spirit that must animate us, not closing ourselves off in our small groups, nor feeling superior to the world. We are called to offer God's love to everyone in order to achieve that unity which does not cancel out differences, but values the personal history of each person and the social and religious culture of every people. So here's an interesting point. He values the religious culture of all religions. Does that sound familiar? It should. This is the post-conciliar movement that highlights whatever is good, true, and beautiful in various religions, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Islam, in Judaism, in whatever. He says that we need to value not just personal differences that we see with individuals, but even the differences that we see with other religious cultures. He says we need to value that. Brothers and sisters, this is the hour for love. The heart of the gospel is the love of God that makes us brothers and sisters. With my predecessor, Leo the 13th, we can ask ourselves today, if this criterion were to prevail in the world, would not every conflict cease and peace return? Within the light of the strength of the Holy Spirit, let's build a church founded on God's love, a sign of unity, a missionary church that opens its arms to the world, proclaims the word, allows itself to be made restless by history, and becomes a leaven of harmony for humanity. Together as one people, as brothers and sisters, let's walk towards God and love one another. So there's his message, short and sweet, and we see a lot of similar themes to what he's brought about in previous audiences, and very much consistent with what he told us with the College of Cardinals that he's going to be highlighting. And so very, again, much in line with what was to be expected from Pope Leo XIV. Now, shortly after that, he had a Regina Coeli message at the conclusion of the Mass. He says, as we conclude this celebration, I greet and thank all of you, the people of Rome and the faithful from many parts of the world who wish to participate. In particular, I express my gratitude to the official delegations from numerous countries, as well as to the representatives of churches and ecclesial communities and other religions. I extend a warm welcome to the thousands of pilgrims who have come from every continent. Dear brothers and sisters, I thank you for keeping the great heritage of popular piety. All right, so here's the bombshell. All right, here's the part. During Mass, I strongly felt the spiritual presence of Pope Francis accompanying us from heaven. Full stop. So he's saying Pope Francis is in heaven. Now, there's going to be some people very happy about that. Others have expressed concern saying, well, maybe he's in heaven, but maybe he's in purgatory. And if he's in purgatory, to assume that he's in heaven without some kind of official canonization would be to rob him of the prayers of the faithful, rob him of the intercession of the faithful that is due to him. We've seen this from a number of post-conciliar popes saying this about their predecessors whenever they're elected. A lot of them have said this, right? So, Leo's not doing anything new here. It's not out of the ordinary. But again, some people say, but wait, maybe don't jump the gun. Don't rush to say that, because short of knowing that he's in heaven through the process of canonization, one may be robbing him of the prayers that he needs if he's in purgatory. Okay. So I suspect there will be a lot of discussions surrounding that in the coming days, at least for anybody who's paying attention. I don't know. Maybe people won't really highlight that in the news. Maybe people won't talk about it. There's been a whole lot of stuff that has really come out of Pope Leo already that people haven't noticed. So maybe this one will slip under the radar. Reflecting on our participation in the communion of saints, I recall that yesterday in France, the priest Camille Costa de Bogard was beatified. He lived from the end of the 1800s to the 1900s, and he was a witness of great pastoral charity. In the joy of faith and communion, we cannot forget our brothers and sisters who are suffering of war. In Gaza, the surviving children, families, and elderly are reduced to starvation. In Myanmar, the new hostilities have cut short innocent young lives. Finally, war-torn Ukraine awaits negotiations for a just and lasting peace. And by the way, J.D. Vance and Zelensky were present, and he urged them after that Mass to have discussions. We'll see if anything transpires from it. Therefore, as we treat or entrust to Mary the service of the Bishop of Rome, pastor of the universal church, let us from the bark of Peter look to her, star of the sea, Our Lady of Good Counsel, as a sign of hope. We implore her intercession for the gift of peace, for support and comfort, for those who suffer, and for the grace of all of us to be witnesses to the risen Lord. Okay, so again, another message, short and sweet, but definitely a bombshell in there with reference to the Pope Leo claim. I spoke to a priest earlier that I know very well, and it turns out he was in Rome for this service. And he said that whenever he said that Pope Francis is in heaven, he said that the crowd was visibly moved, and it was very impactful to the audience when he said that. So I thought that was interesting. I actually had somebody earlier say that they're not going to believe that he said that unless there's evidence for it. So, of course, I showed y'all the information there on the screen. There's also video footage of his speech there from the Regina Celli at the end of the Mass. Father Brown said, it's not me, y'all. Father Brown, good to see you. Well, Father Brown, believe it or not, well, you actually know the priest too. So, but yeah, it's not Father Brown. Good to see you there in the chat. Let's see what else we have here. Soldier of Mary says that's the Holy Spirit speaking through him. Well, there's going to be some people who feel that way. Others who say, well, no, you shouldn't say that he's in heaven because without the canonization process, maybe he's in purgatory and you're robbing him of prayers. I've seen some people say that already, and I've seen others say, oh, I'm so happy he said that, right? So it's kind of a mixed bag. There will be different perspectives there. Thesaurus says he's going to canonize Francis. Tell me what you honestly think. Well, I think that I do think that he likely will canonize Pope Francis. I think that's pretty likely. Maybe not just absolutely right away. There is a canonical process that one needs to go through, but popes can, of course, dispense with that process. The Pope has plenary authority in the church, so he's not bound to follow these kinds of constructs that are certainly post-apostolic in nature and therefore are reformable and have been reformed in many times. And the canonization process is really a second millennium thing anyway, that has undergone a lot of modifications. But popes are, of course, free to modify it or just completely ignore it if they wanted to. That doesn't mean that's the best approach. That doesn't mean that they should, but it does mean that they have that power to do so. Maybe he will kind of skip the process and say, well, no miracles are required. We're going to go ahead and canonize them. Maybe he'll wait. But I do suspect that he will be the one to canonize Pope Francis. I do think that's my personal opinion. Maybe I'll be wrong about that, right? But I kind of get that impression. As much as he quotes him in literally every speech. I really get the impression he's especially with this comment today, that he's going to be pretty keen on the idea of canonizing his predecessor. Okay. Soldier of Mary said he could feel his presence, but who knows? He probably can see him. Okay, thank you for that. Sainthood music. What do I think? Well, as far as what I think, well, as I noted, I do think that he will canonize him. What do I think about saying that somebody's in heaven short of the canonization process? Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like maybe the most prudent course of action would be to suspend those kinds of judgments and rather to offer prayers for them because again, short of the canonization process, nobody really knows. So until that kind of judgment has been made, it appears it would just be more wise to go ahead and offer prayers for that person rather than assume that they're already there. Because if you assume they're already in heaven, that certainly will take away, or in fact probably eliminate all need to intercede for that person, right? So, yeah. Tyler says canonizing Pope Francis before Benedict would be odd. Well, um, you have canonizations of John Paul II before Pius XII. I don't know if it would be that odd. Looking through the chat to see what else we have. Kilo says, I think canonization is just a verification to recognize saintly men and women, sort of like a certificate of sainthood. Yeah, that's effectively what it is. But, short of that, it's a shot in the dark. It's kind of a guess. And, if you go ahead and assume one thing, you might then take away an opportunity for intercession. Viola says, straight to heaven, deal with it, haters. What else do we have? Thank you for the super chat, Sainthood Music. Do you think it's right for him to say Francis is in heaven? Well, I weighed in on that just a moment ago, so maybe you sent that before I weighed in, though. What else do we have? Declaring Benedict a doctor of the church and canonizing Francis. Oh boy, a doctor of the church, huh? Well, I kind of wonder, with a doctor of the church, the writings of the individual have to be really pristine. And there were some things that Ratzinger said before he was Pope that I don't know if you would want to defend. So I don't know how that would work. I don't know if they would want to make a caveat. There were some interesting things he said about the resurrection that might not be fully up to par. But that's debatable, right? There'll be debates and discussions on his perspective there. But there could be some controversy surrounding some of the things that he wrote theologically at various points in his life. And maybe that would impede that process of being selected as a doctor of the church. There's only a few of them. There's 30 something in 2,000 years of church history. That's a pretty high standard. Okay, what else do we have? Thesaurus says, if he's in heaven, he's a saint. That's basic catechism. Right. So if somebody is in heaven, they are deemed to be a saint. And also, therefore, there's no need to pray for them because they already behold the beatific vision. Okay, Dylan says, Pope Francis endured much suffering, so that is a very saint-like, right? Many people have endured a lot of suffering. Besides that, Francis showed a lot of charisms that was supernatural, not in flashy sense. I've seen some people say that. I don't know. When you say these charisms, however, are supernatural, well, there were certainly a lot of virtues there. All of these kinds of virtues, in one sense, are supernatural, right? Especially the theological virtues. But I think everybody who's in a state of grace possesses those. And so, if you're going to, however, say this person is somebody who should be canonized, I think you might want to look for miracles and stuff like that. What else do we have? Are canonizations infallible? Papal canonizations are generally considered to be infallible by most theologians, historically and traditionally, because the language that the Pope uses is the same language he uses for ex cathedra infallible teachings. So the language that he used for Pius IX used for the Immaculate Conception to define that dogma, or Pius XII for the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, When you look at those papal definitions in their respective apostolic constitutions, the language used in the definition certainly is the language that Pastor Eternus from Vatican I calls for. It's that solemn ex cathedra language for a pope, and he uses that during canonizations. So I think the difficulty in saying that they're not infallible would have to be to argue why that language is infallible for something like the Immaculate Conception, but not for something like a canonization of a saint. Some have attempted to offer a substantial distinction there and therefore allow for error in papal canonizations, but I don't know if they're really being consistent in my personal evaluation. And then number two, they're certainly in the minority. That is not the historical or traditional or even majority position. It's relatively fringe. And the reason why most people who hold to that position maintain that position is not for theological purposes. It's because they don't believe that a particular person who has been canonized could possibly be canonized. So when Paul VI and John Paul II, and John is the 23rd, especially Paul VI and John the 23rd, who oversaw Vatican II, were canonized, that's when you started to see people questioning papal canonizations because they felt there is no way that the man who called Vatican II or the man who closed Vatican II could be a saint. So, in other words, their problem is more with Vatican II than it was with the question of papal canonizations. So there were ulterior motives for that theological position. Okay. Thesaurus, are you going to be following Leo XIV's activity? This might be the first full online pope. Well, yeah, certainly going to do my best. I kind of feel like Pope Francis was the first full online pope, right? Maybe I think what you mean by that is that he's personally online. I doubt very seriously that Pope Leo will be handling his own Twitter account, right? I don't think he's going to be typing at Pontifex, right? So, what else do we have here? Okay, so let me see. There's another super chat here. Let me grab it and thank you for that. George, thank you for the super chat. How do you think Alex did versus Ubi? I haven't seen it yet. I saw the part where Ubi burped and played it off, but that was the only thing I saw, only because that part was time stamped for me. I did see where he strawmanned me as well. That part was sent to me as a clip, and yeah, it was a straw man. But the rest of the 5 hours I didn't watch yet. Enslaved by Truth, thank you for the super sticker. Hey, Lofton, would love to see you find an expert on Catholic heraldry and do a stream on papal coat arms. Francis and Benedict had interesting ones. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I haven't thought of that before, and I'm not really sure who would be a good guest along those lines. Maybe you can give some recommendations. What else do we have? Does sainthood require some miracle as proof for sainthood? The current process does, but of course the Pope can dispense with that process. The Pope has plenary authority in the church, and these post-apostolic processes, the Pope is not bound to because he's the one who promulgates them. And so if he makes the rules, he can change the rules. So now, whether or not he should change the rule is a different question, right? Keep that in mind. There's an important difference. Okay, Father Brown weighs in. I predict a double canonization of Benedict XVI and Francis, kind of like John Paul and John the 23rd. You're probably right. You're probably right. You know, now that I think about it, now that you mention it, you twisted my arm and convinced me. I think you're right. He might just go ahead and do both simultaneously, as you're saying there. I could totally see that. That way, there's no perceived, slight against Pope Benedict. What else do we have? What else? I'm looking through the chat. are adding to the Roman martyrology ex cathedra. I do not believe he uses that particular language whenever someone is added to the Roman martyrology, like Isaac of Nineveh was recently added. That language that he uses in a papal canonization, that solemn language, doesn't appear to be added to the Roman martyrology. Um, but I do kind of wonder if, when we're to argue that somebody is in hell, is added to the Roman martyrology. I wonder if that would impact other areas of ecclesiology. You know, it would kind of be like the same as what happens with all of the saints who never went through that formal canonization process, like early church fathers and first millennium saints. Um, they never went through that process of solemn papal canonization, but there's kind of a reception of their sainthood. I'm part of the church. Um, I could see somebody arguing that there would be a certain level of protection there. And maybe for those same reasons, I kind of wonder if you would have that a similar level of protection for adding somebody to the Roman martyrology. Okay, great question. Okay, what else do we have? Kristen. Yes, canonization is an irreformable papal act, but what Leo did was not canonization today. Right. I don't know anybody who was suggesting that what he did today was solemn papal canonizations. Yet it caught my attention as well and made me uncomfortable. Well, some people were uncomfortable and didn't appreciate it for the reasons why I mentioned. Other people loved it and felt that this is wonderful because they really want to see um, Pope Francis, eventually canonized. Susan, did Judas Iscariot not perform miracles? Good point. Um, there's certainly a point to be made there. Puzzles. I appreciate you giving alternative positions. That's kind of the goal, is to give you different perspectives so that you can at least understand why certain people believe what they believe. So that's why I shared with you why some think that papal canonizations are infallible and why others take a different position and don't believe that solemn canonizations are infallible. You may agree with one or the other, but it's important to kind of understand the reasoning that both of them have, just so that you can appreciate people better. I mean, that's one of the goals of this channel, is to try to now focus on help educating people about different perspectives. Um, I think that will go a long way in fostering goodwill when it comes to online discussions. There's so much of a toxic bent to so many discussions today. And I think it's in large part due to a failure of people to understand why different people hold to different positions. And so I think the more you understand why somebody holds to a different view other than your own, the more you can at least kind of appreciate where they're coming from. And that might help establish a little bit more, goodwill towards one another, and healthier discussions and dialogue online. Because I think that the situation with social media and discussions there has become a cesspool. It's incredibly toxic, and I just don't find it to be productive at all. I just don't. You might find every now and then something that's profitable, but I feel like the vast majority of theological discussions at this point are no longer profitable because there isn't goodwill, there isn't an honest exchange and dialogue, an exchange of ideas in a respectful manner. And I think that's one of the reasons why is people don't necessarily understand where the other person is coming from and why. So we're going to try to focus on that more moving forward. What else do we have? Okay. Father Brown says he's an amateur heraldry enthusiast. Sounds like another Father Brown stream incoming. Yeah, we still also have to do a was it Second Amendment video. Super Gamer says, "Do you think that public will have a better of opinion of Pope Francis now?" I don't see any reason why that would substantially change right now. Um, unless something significant happens, I don't think that people are trying to rethink through that whole pontificate. So I would kind of ask, what would trigger them to reevaluate their biases and positions and judgments so far? What would initiate that? Um, you would have to point to something substantial that would demonstrate something that would cause people to rethink through everything that they've deemed to be true for what 12, 13 years. Not many people do that. Very few people are that reflective. um, so I don't know. I don't see that happening anytime soon, at least. Does the Pope have actually absolute power? Not absolute power. No, he doesn't have that in Catholicism. He doesn't have the ability to change the deposit of faith. There are limitations there. But questions like canonization process, that falls within his authority to modify or even ignore, because it's not an apostolic practice. It's certainly not part of the deposit of faith. And even apostolic practices have been changed in the Catholic Church many times. The apostolic practice of communion in the hand has been changed in many cases to communion on the tongue or some other way. Or the apostolic practice of administering communion in both kinds has been modified in many cases in the Latin Rite. Um, the apostolic practice of facing east liturgically in prayer has been modified. The apostolic practice of having a bishop administer confirmation has been modified to one degree or another. The apostolic practice forbidding eating meat with blood in it has been modified by the Council of Florence, and also, it would seem, to one degree, by the Apostle Paul. So, apostolic practice has been altered, and there have been deviations and changes in that. But the apostolic faith can't be changed, right? So there are limitations to a pope when it comes to those kinds of immutable doctrines. But short of that, he has plenary authority to bind and loose in the church matters of discipline. And so the process of canonization, how that functions, that would be a matter of discipline. Michael, I know you're smart because there are a lot of books in your background. um, well, the other 3,000 books in this office you can't see. So if you think this is impressive, you need to see the rest of the office. But this is why some people say the books aren't real, right? They say that I just have fake books, but in reality, if you were to open up a random book, you will likely see my notes in the beginning of the book. So, what else do we have here? Okay. Sainthood, thank you. Do you think Leo will lift the Vatican's foot off the neck of the TLM? That's one way to put it. I'm pretty sure I know what perspective you're coming from. Tell me what you believe about Traditionis Custodes without telling me what you believe about Traditionis Custodes. Well, without having to get through the whole discussion of how productive was it? What were the intentions behind it? Was there a legitimate need for it? Did all of the bishops of the world call for it? Putting aside all of that we've already explored on this channel for 4 years or so at this point. Do I think that he will lift Traditionis Custodes? I think it's unlikely. You might have him being a little less what's the word I'm looking for? He may not apply the restrictions of Traditionis Custodes to the parish level, perhaps as aggressively as some of the instances we saw in the previous pontificate. We did see some cases where at the parish level it was allowed. Of course, it's still allowed in those fraternal societies that are dedicated specifically to preserving a charism, um, of upholding that liturgical form. But at the parish level, we did see in some cases restrictions, and in others, there weren't restrictions. It just was taken on a case by case basis with the Vatican. I could see maybe Leola being a little bit more lenient in individual cases, but um, I don't think he'll do a full reversal. Um, I kind of wonder at this point, if you reverse Traditionis Custodes, you would have a reversal of a reversal of a reversal of a reversal at that point in the post-conciliar period. Um, so how well does that speak to the reliability of the magisterium in matters of the application of discipline to constantly flip-flop like that? Moreover, the underlying conditions that led to the restriction in some cases of the Latin Mass at the parish level, those are still present. And Pope Leo knows that. So he would have to still deal with those underlying issues in one way or another. And if it's not through Traditionis Custodes, what would it be through? The conditions that led to TC are still there. They may have even gotten more significant. I mean, maybe worse in some cases, more of an aggravated situation. Those underlying conditions are still present. He knows that. So I don't see him fully reversing it. Who knows? Maybe he will, though. Anyone seen the fake AI Pope Leo XIV homily channels yet? Yeah, just came across that in the last few days ago. What's up with that? I don't know anything else about it, but yeah. Not in vogue. Appreciate your content. Thank you. Appreciate the kind words. Glad you're enjoying it. David Stewart says, as a non-Catholic, I actually really like this Pope. Praying for him. Thank you for that comment. What else do we have in the chat? Is canonization declaring that someone is in heaven or recognizing that a person is worthy of public cult? At this point in the canonization process, it's just a recognition they're in heaven. Maybe in other instances of the canonization process from, multiple decades ago, maybe it was more of a statement that this person possessed heroic virtues. But the process has been modified to where some would question whether or not that's really the claim at this point, right? So yeah, it's a great question, very perceptive. Good question. Is there no way that Vatican II and the popes since then could be wrong about religious liberty and this new approach regarding ecumenism? Oh boy. Oh, where do we begin? That's a good question. I did kind of talk a little bit about this in a couple lectures I just did. The website rtcourses.com, RT Reason Theology, rtcourses.com. Look at magisterial difficulties, exploring tensions in the documents of the church. I talk a little bit about this there, but to answer your question, so without going into all of the details to arrive at this conclusion, it appears that the post-conciliar teaching on the question of religious liberty is non-definitive in nature. But it also appears that the preconciliar position is arguably non-definitive in nature. One may argue that the postconciliar position slightly outweighs the preconciliar position. So if there were a contradiction between the two, assent would be given to the latter. But I would still think that it would be non-definitive in either case. I could see why somebody might attempt to argue that it's definitive in nature, especially when the church is rooting its position in human dignity. Certainly human dignity is not something that would ever be reformed, but perhaps locating the church's position in that may be a position that is reformable. I could see somebody arguing that. I think, however, the better question would be, rather than could they be wrong, I think the better question would be, what is the likelihood that the church would reverse a position that it has so vehemently defended for how many decades now? Since 1965, right? So we're looking at 60 years there, right? What's the likelihood it would do that? One second. It appears incredibly unlikely. And what would that do to the reputation of the church? So for decades, they taught something on religious liberty, and they come back later and say, sorry, guys, we got it wrong. Now, if there is no way to harmonize the post and preconciliar teaching, which many have attempted to do, but if there's no way to do it, then subtly, Vatican II was saying that the preconciliar popes were wrong. But again, many people have attempted to harmonize them. But at this point, to reverse everything in the postconciliar period, I don't think it would be sufficient to just silently reverse it. I think they would need to say, yeah, we got it wrong, kind of a thing, and here's why we no longer maintain this. And what's the likelihood that the magisterium would do such a thing? Now you might say, well, if it's the truth, they need to do it. Sure, of course. The problem still remains. What would that do to the reputation of the magisterium? So for decades, you told us one thing, it turns out to be wrong. How can I ever trust anything that you tell me now? Maybe you're wrong about this too. Maybe you're wrong and the other position was right. All right. What would that do to the reliability of the magisterium to so consistently teach something for so long and then to reverse that? But for people who think that there's rupture between the pre and post conciliar periods on this, they would say that position is, or that problem is already existent, because they would say that the previous teaching on religious liberty was taught for a very long time and then was reversed. Of course, Vatican II denied any reversal and said that it maintains the traditional position. But it's one thing to say that, it's another to prove it. And if I recall in the Acts of Vatican II, they were discussing, well, okay, how do you prove that these things are reconcilable? And the idea was, well, future theologians will have to figure that one out. Gee, thanks, Vatican II. Puzzles. Michael helped me so much by clarifying practices, disciplines versus doctrine. Thank you. Yeah, it's important to be aware of differences there. Thank you for the super sticker. Do you think Leo will lift the Vatican's foot on? I think you sent that one before you saw me answer the other one. Do you think Leo will lift the Vatican's foot off of TLM's neck? What are your thoughts on the letters Francis wrote that are to be opened 33 days post his death? This is the first I've heard of that. What are you referring to? If this is common information, somehow that one passed me by. I'm not aware of letters that are to be opened 33 days post his death. Maybe I can find something at Google search here. Letters of Pope Francis after 33 days. This almost sounds like something you would hear on Twitter, but isn't accurate, you know. Um, um, I don't see anything about it. I'm sorry. I kind of wonder if that's one of those internet rumors. If you have some evidence for it, though, please send that to me or alert me to it in the comment section. Enslaved. I love how cardboard books and Baron books are still a meme around here. Makes me feel good. I know, right? I love it. I love that y'all keep that up. And whatever happened to the globe and the ladder? Y'all forgot about that one, right? uh, okay, what else do we have? Oh, I did forget to address the question of ecumenism. But this commenter says, I'm not Michael, but I think you would say the promotion of ecumenism or religious liberty are practices regarding how the church operates, not necessarily unchanging doctrine. Well, there's a combination of both for both, right? There's a doctrine behind the question of ecumenism, and there's an application of that doctrine with the question of ecumenism. There's a doctrine behind the religious liberty question, and then there's an application of that doctrine on the religious liberty question. Of course, disciplines can be modified, but the underlying doctrine upon which those disciplines are to be based, those are the ones that I was discussing moments ago. The question of ecumenism, I didn't mention that, but yeah, you do have some doctrinal aspects there. I think I gave a lecture a while back on the history of communicatio and sacris. May want to go and watch that one on the channel. I talk about the history of the Catholic Church's administration and sharing of the sacraments with schismatics. In some cases, it was more lax than in others. Some popes were more lax on the question than others. Sometimes Catholics were ordained by Orthodox, or Orthodox could go to confession with the Catholic priest without having to accept the papal dogmas. Sometimes they would share in the Eucharist. Sometimes Rome would allow a patriarch who converts to Catholicism in secret to remain Eastern Orthodox and to remain over his flock. So they would allow for him to remain there without formally, or at least publicly, making a profession of joining the Catholic Church. Certainly those things impact the question of ecumenism, right? So it seems like there have been different disciplines here, but there are some core doctrines behind the question of ecumenism that are irreformable in nature. Regardless of what the application, there are some doctrines that are irreformable. Now, whether or not the disciplines are always consistent with the doctrine is a different question. It's not just the question of ecumenism. Sometimes, like the Council of Trent tolerated economia with the question of divorce and remarriage and administering communion to adulterers without going to confession. It tolerated that in very minor pockets of the Eastern Church. It allowed for it. I've spoken about this on the channel before and provided the sources for that claim. It's in the Acts of the Council of Trent. Hardly controversial for anyone who knows the history of the subject, but they tolerated it even though it goes against the dogma, right? It technically is adultery. It's technically against the dogma, but they tolerated it. They don't endorse it, but tolerated it. Might you argue that, okay, in some ways, maybe this is incompatible with doctrine, but this practice is tolerated for this or that reason? Might you argue that in the cases of some instances of ecumenism? Well, if you say no, I would ask, upon what basis then did the Tridentine Fathers do such things? Or, yeah, I would point to that, right? Okay, what else do we have? Thanks for the love there, Buckmeister. Appreciate you. Okay, what else do we have? Thank you for the super sticker. Is the condition of the body critical to canonization still or ever? I know this is brought up about Father Bishop Sheen. Father? Not necessarily. So you have the concept of incorruptibles in other religions as well. So I don't know if that really is an indicator of sainthood. And certainly numerous people who have been canonized were not incorruptible, right? So, Michael, I'd love your insight about whether a pope can declare someone as damned in the same way they declare someone as saved. Well, I would ask, when they condemned the 3 chapters at the Fifth Ecumenical Council, how was that not a judgment on their soul and a statement that these people are damned? Some would say, no, it's just an ecclesiastical judgment to warn the faithful of following them. Is that all it was? Seems like they're a little bit more aggressive in their condemnation of the 3 chapters than merely warning people about their writings. Seems like they're making judgments about their souls. So I don't know if I'm fully convinced for people who say that the church can only canonize and determine that people are in heaven. It can't make judgments on whether someone is in hell. I don't know if that really matches up with the historical record. Now, whether or not they got some of these cases accurate or not is a different question. Okay. What's wrong with orthodoxy, according to your opinion? I wrote a book called Answering Orthodoxy that goes into this in more detail, but the shortest answer would be, I would argue that the Eastern Orthodox accepted papal indefectibility at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, the same one where sessions later they condemned Honorius, which is not a problem for Catholics because there's a way to make it consistent with Catholicism, but it is a problem for Eastern Orthodox because papal indefectibility is papal infallibility, and they accept the Sixth Ecumenical Council. So when the Sixth Ecumenical Council accepted papal infallibility, I think that's incompatible with their position. And I've never seen a sufficient explanation other than to just say this is a forgery. But I think that that's not very convincing. It does cause an additional difficulty for them, though, because they're evaluating all of Pope Agatho's predecessors as Orthodox, Honorius included. They do that whenever they accept Agatho's letter to the emperor that was read at the council, where it's claimed that all of Agatho's predecessors were Orthodox. That includes Honorius. They accepted that. And then several sessions later, they anathematized Honorius. Did they contradict themselves? Well, here's where you have to have the Eastern Orthodox Council explain. I think there's ways to explain this from a Catholic perspective, but I don't see a way to explain it from an Eastern Orthodox perspective. But even more importantly, there's an affirmation of the claim of papal indefectibility and that the See of Rome is undefiled in its teachings. They accept that. So if they're going to back away from that, it seems that they back away from a doctrinal judgment that they previously accepted. So now they're changing and flip-flopping on not just a person, they're flip-flopping on a doctrine. And if they're changing their doctrines in the same council, it sounds like it's not a very reliable council. I think that's a pretty big problem. That's one of my arguments, but read the book for more information. Do Catholics believe Orthodox people will go to hell? So in Lumen Gentium, paragraph 14, it says that if somebody knows that the Catholic Church was made necessary by Jesus and refused to enter or remain in it, they cannot be saved. That's nearly a direct quote. That's the end of paragraph 14. But that's if somebody knows the truth and willfully rejects the truth. After that, in the following paragraph, paragraph 15, it does speak about Eastern Orthodox, and it does say that they could be saved, but that's after the previous paragraph that says if they know the truth and reject it, they can't be saved. So whenever it speaks of that the Holy Spirit can save them through their sacraments, it's assuming these people are invincibly ignorant and are not aware of the truth. But for the Eastern Orthodox who are aware of the truth and reject it, they cannot be saved. For the ones who are ignorant and could not have overcome that ignorance, it indicates they could be saved through their sacraments. Do you know if Cardinal Prevost was on any research team for Strickland? I hear something, but I'm not sure. He was over the removal of Bishop Strickland. So he was one of the main guys over it, according to Strickland himself. I saw some people try to say, well, maybe he wasn't very involved in the process. Huh. That's weird. Because people didn't say that about Pope Francis. They assumed he was all over that process and threw him under the bus for that. Huh. It's weird they didn't give him the same benefit of the doubt. That's interesting. So a guy who's over the dicastery that deals with this is somehow less informed than the Pope, who's even more distant from the situation? Huh. Weird how that works, where we want to Prevost-splain or Leo-splain, but throw Pope Francis under the bus. Interesting inconsistency. Thank you for this, Alma. Please support the channel with a like. Yes, please do that and hit the subscribe button as well. I should try to get the Pope on the channel. He's always welcome. He would always be welcome. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any way to get in touch with him. So, probably won't happen. I've had cardinals on, I've had bishops on, but I've never had a Pope on. And don't really expect that I'll ever have one on. So, but he's welcome, sure. If Pope Francis is declared a saint, does the church exhume his body and make relics of it? Yes, they would distribute relics. Latins should start growing beards. It would help. That was an interesting part of the divisions between East and West, was the question of beards. The beards debate. The beard issue was bigger for them than the question of the papacy and the filioque, believe it or not. The question of beards, whether you use leaven and unleavened bread, and the question of purgatory. Those were more important in the 11th century than the papal dogmas and the filioque. Funny how that's changed. Oh boy. What else do we have here? Okay. Marilyn says there's a lot of garbage in the chat. Well, sorry about that. can't get to all that while doing a live show as well. Would I have Cardinal DiNardo on? I'd be willing to if he's willing. I met him in person briefly years ago. He wouldn't remember me, but yeah, I did meet him very briefly. I have a funny story about it that I told you about a few weeks ago. But yeah, I'd be willing to have him on. But I don't have any direct connections with him or anything. So yeah. Wait, how did they back the beards? I don't know what you mean by back the beards. I don't know what that means. Could you call the Pope's letter a precursor to papal infallibility, but not explicitly, which makes the argument weaker? Even if you want to say it's a precursor, it's in seed form, and it's still substantially the same, and it is sufficiently speaking of papal infallibility to where it doesn't get the Orthodox out of the bind. Seed form, precursor, doesn't matter. He says the See of Rome will be undefiled unto the end in its teaching acts. And he bases that on a promise of Jesus, which would mean the promise wouldn't fail. I don't know how you can make sense of that from the Orthodox perspective. So the semantics of, is it in seed form or a precursor? It doesn't matter. It's enough of a claim to exclude the Orthodox position, unless the Orthodox position is willing to now say that the Pope's teaching authority is always undefiled and to the end because of a divine promise. If they're willing to say that, there's no problem. But they're not going to say that because that's called papal infallibility. Thank you, Michael, for your videos. God bless you. Gives me a better understanding of Catholicism. Greetings from the Netherlands. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, happy to help in any way. That's awesome that you're watching from the Netherlands. I'm glad Orthodox women get an exemption from growing beards. Well, of course, the claim would be that it would be males, right? But it was more in relation to priests, that the priests don't have beards in the Latin Rite. That was a problem. So that's what it was in reference to. What argument did they have for long beards? Well, you can find cases where biblical figures had beards, right? And so there it is, slam dunk, right? That settles it. Marilyn says canonizing Pope Francis would not advance the goal of unity, and probably wouldn't be prudent at this time. Well, if the magisterium is going to say, let's suspend canonizations because they wouldn't advance unity, then it probably should have taken that advice and applied it like several hundred years ago, and not dogmatize the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption and stuff like that. It probably should have said, wait, as soon as it had its first schism, wait, let's not go anymore. Which probably means it should have also applied this logic to the 5th century, and it should no longer have issued any more dogmas since then, because all of the dogmas that have been defined since the 5th century will be an obstacle for the Assyrian Church of the East and the Oriental Orthodox. And all of the ones that come after the Eastern Orthodox division would obviously be obstacles for them. So if all of the sudden that's going to be considered a standard, which might not be a bad standard, I kind of wonder, why wasn't that idea taken before? Because it seems like a whole lot of damage then would have been done, and a whole lot of obstacles to unity would have been created in the last 1600 years by all the dogmatizations since then. So why all of a sudden is this an issue with Pope Francis? Would be my question. What about all the other people that have been canonized? So Puzzle says beard splaining. I love it. It was a big deal to know. That was the number one thing. You remember I showed y'all the Byzantine lists where you had all these grievances from the Eastern churches about the Latins? I have a show on the Byzantine list. One of their grievances was that the icons that the Latins were using had a beardless Jesus. So their grievance was their Jesus and their icons looks like a Frank. I guess Frankish people didn't have beards. He looks like a Frank. That was by far the weirdest grievance I've seen on that list. There's a lot of weird ones, right? That one was a big one. Beard splaining. What else do we have here? David says, my beard got burned by my kids. Goodness. Wowzers. That sounds horrible. Michael Lofton, swole arc went. What is a swole arc? You young whippersnappers. Swole arc. Let me Google it. What is this? Nothing's coming up. I'm not really finding a definition for this. I don't know. I don't know what that is. Latin splaining. Yeah. You look like a Frank. That was a fun show. A clean shaven Jesus. Yeah, like the early church depictions where they depicted him as the god Hermes. There's I think he was beardless in those, right? There's a long history of Christian history taking images from paganism and baptizing them and making biblical figures into inspired off of pagan images. As in when you get buff. Oh, well, incidentally, I have been lifting. So you never know. I want you to become swole. I might. I have been lifting, so powerful and strong and live a long time. Hey, yes, that's the most important thing, right? Is to be healthy, to live longer, and that's why I've been doing more cardio, and I've been doing more working out, and I'm very intentional about it, because God, gotta have good health. I've been thinking about, well, I want to see grandkids and be around for a while, right? So I got to take care of myself. So I've been focusing on that. So yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll get I'll get a swole arc, as you're saying. Sorry, I didn't know the term. A time period is an arc. Okay. Swole. I've heard swole for muscular. I've never heard of, well, arc. Okay, yeah. I guess I didn't see how they. Okay. Now we're getting to the beard explanation, basically. Make Catholics buff with beards again. That's right. There you go. Yeah, I think that will be a good thing. A good thing for me. So I got kind of got from my father large build, large frame. So I already have the frame for kind of a a bodybuilding figure if I were to put the time into it. But just need to be disciplined and do it consistently. Like a character arc. Yeah, I'm familiar with character arc. Yeah. You have to take care of your back. Yeah. I feel like the issue with my back. I've always had back problems since a teenager, even when I was in just absolutely incredible shape. Always had back issues. I feel like it's because of sometimes the way I sleep. I don't know. It's like I'll wake up sometimes and I know I can feel it in my back and I'm gonna have issues. And it was from one of the way, I guess, just the way in which I was sleeping. Bishop Barron is jacked. I've seen some of those pictures. Yeah, yeah. Um, Barren biceps. Try the carnivore diet. Yeah, got to get back to that. But it's just not something I can do for long term, right? But it is helpful for like short term um, results. Buff with beards. Let the priest shave. That's funny. Workout with Father Brown. Yeah. Father Brown's in like 4 or 5 hours away though. Yeah. Anyways, though. So that's going to do it. I hope y'all enjoyed the stream and glad to also be able to hang out with y'all and do some Q&A here at the end. That's always fun. I'll try to be more intentional about doing that. Hopefully this was helpful and productive for y'all, not only explaining the speech from Pope Leo the 14th and his comments about Pope Francis, but also expanding on anything that y'all asked there in the comment section. So if you enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button. I really would appreciate your support. And like I've been telling y'all about that course that I just put out. I'll be doing another one soon, so I'll start. I'll give y'all an announcement on it soon. But if you go to sharing my screen here, rtcourses.com, R as in reason, T as in theology, courses.com. Click on magisterial difficulties, exploring tensions in the documents of the church, and you'll see a pretty interesting video here that explores some tensions on the question of death penalty, religious liberties, no salvation outside the church, and slavery. You'll find that to be a nice mini course. And then also the 7 ecumenical councils. I think you'll find that one to be enjoyable as well. So that one's 7 lectures. This one's 2 lectures. But go ahead and check it out, rtcourses.com. And some new courses coming soon. So stay tuned for more information there. How was that course event? Was very well, and very well attended as well. And because it was very successful, I'm going to continue to do these because it appears there's enough interest. So, but since it's no longer like a live event, you can go and watch the videos. They're all recorded, and so it's all available, and you can immediately access them as soon as you purchase the course. But much more to come on that, so stay tuned for more. And again, consider supporting the channel at Patreon. I do a lot of patron only content. Just did a show for y'all earlier yesterday. Yeah, so a lot of patron only exclusive content. You'll get the inside scoop there. So hit the join button right here on YouTube, right next to the subscribe button, or go to Patreon, patreon.com/reason and theology, and consider supporting me there. So I can continue to provide this content, and you also get extra perks and access to all the exclusive content. So consider supporting there. Yeah, and Saved by Truth, you've been here for a while. Thank you so much. I've been a paid member for 40 months. Abide my request. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Viola's also been supporting the channel. Like the stream if you didn't already, says Pope Leo. Just kidding. Trix RN, you've been also supporting the channel for a while. Same to you, D Bear. Thank y'all so much for supporting the channel. YouTube, Big Stack, you've been a great help. Jimmy J, all of y'all have been supporting the channel. I see all of y'all there in the chat, and everybody else. Great Wog, good to see y'all. You've been a good supporter. So thank y'all so much for supporting the channel and Enslaved by Truth. Yeah. I really appreciate y'all's support because again, this is how I provide for my family. So thank you for allowing me to be able to do that, right? And to be able to continue to provide this content to everybody. So if you want to support along those lines, and you're not already doing so, hit the join button right here on YouTube, or again, Patreon. All right, that's going to do it for today. I will see y'all tomorrow for more content I will be reviewing. Most likely, I think tomorrow I'm probably going to tackle one of those more recent Wes Huff videos. I forget the guy's channel he just went on. It was a really big channel, and it's making its rounds all over social media. And he has some comments about Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and I was going to review those and talk about them, kind of like I did previously with some other videos from Wes Huff. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. All right, that's it. We'll see you later. God bless.